Welcome to episode 190 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders of the credit union movement that make it so great. This episode is brought to you by Velera, formerly PSCU Co-op Solutions, the nation's premier payments credit union service organization and an integrated financial technology solutions provider. Velera serves more than 4,000 financial institutions throughout North America, operating with velocity to help its clients keep pace with the rapid momentum of change and fuel growth in a new era of financial services. They also have a longtime partner and supporter of this show, so we thank them. Check them out in the show notes. Today, I'm having a conversation with Jill Nowacki. Beyond being my human, Jill is also the founder, president, and CEO of Humanidei, and she's been on the show many times, so we'll link to all of that in the show notes, but welcome back to the show, my love.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
These are always my favorite episodes. So for the people listening that know us, well, this won't come as a surprise, but the idea for this conversation came to us while traveling. And in a specific experience we just had, this word that we kept using and that kept coming up was friction, or to add friction to our, let's call it, user experience. But before we get into that conversation, I wanted just a few background questions for maybe the people who haven't listened to the show in the past and heard you on it. So to start, where did your career start and how did that lead you to where you are today in credit unions?
My credit union career started, which was really the beginning of it. I had a short stint right after graduation in another role, and then was able to move into working with credit unions in the fall of 2001. I started working with credit unions thinking I was going to do it for about 1 year, and then I'd actually go find something that was meaningful and that would add value to the world in a different way. But as you've heard me say before, I was blessed to have that first experience working under the mentorship of Tracy Kenyon. And Tracy is someone who believes deeply in the purpose and mission of credit unions. And so I had the opportunity to learn from her. And after that first year, I knew that making a career in credit unions was a place that I could make a big difference too.
So where's Tracy work now?
Yeah, full circle, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But yeah, Tracy and I now have the chance to work together again. And it's really a great joy and definitely will be something that I look back at as a huge highlight of my career.
So let's talk a little bit about Humanidei. When you think about Humanidei and what you've created 5 years in, what makes you smile?
All of it. It was so 5 years in and literally almost to the week of it being announced right now. And there's so much that I'm so proud of with it. And it's interesting because we started Humanidei in July of 2019. And there were a couple of things that came up in that first 12 months that I didn't expect. One was some real changing tides and sentiments around the awareness of DEI. DEI is, of course, in the name of humanity. It's there for a reason. So we had some awakening and some work in that area that was different than I expected it to be. And the second was, of course, a global pandemic that I also didn't have on my list of expectations for that first 12 months. And it's continued to shape people's relationship with work. Both of those factors have continued to shape people's relationship with work, with the workplace, with employer and employee relationships. And so while I wouldn't have chosen to start a new business right before a global pandemic, I don't think my timing could have been any better. And that definitely makes me smile to know that we were the right organization in the right place at the right time to help credit unions navigate a lot of what we've seen over the last 5 years.
Absolutely. Yeah, your timing was impeccable. Two big picture questions on credit unions. We live in the same house. I know how many Zooms you're on per day. So if there's somebody who talks to more, a cross section of credit unions on a day-to-day basis than you, I'm not sure who it is. But what do you see as the biggest pain points or struggles that you're hearing from credit unions today?
There are several. I'm a little reluctant to say pain points and struggles, although I will say there's a statistic I came across recently, and I have a tendency to feel something anecdotally and then go find the research to back it up. It's kind of how I do things in my world. So deeply analytical, but intuitive first, maybe. And I was having this experiential evidence, I guess, that was just feeling like people aren't staying in their jobs as long. CEOs aren't staying in their jobs as long. So I went and found the research on Fortune 1500 companies going outside of credit unions that shows that CEO tenure today is shorter than it ever has been at these Fortune 1500 companies. And the reason for that is because the CEO job is a whole lot less fun than it used to be. Running a business is more difficult. The pace of change is faster, and the complexities of it are more complex. And so what we're finding is that people, maybe historically, people climbed a ladder looking for that CEO job. And once they arrived, that was what they wanted to retire from. And today, what I think we're seeing is people get that CEO job, and it's not that they hate it, but there are friction points that they didn't expect to have. There are challenges they didn't expect to face. And there are some realizations and awakenings that you can build a really meaningful career without it necessarily culminating in that CEO experience. So people step away from the CEO job, maybe to be consultants, maybe to take number 2 positions at other companies. And so that kind of is a roundabout way of saying, I think one of the biggest challenges credit unions are facing is just the pace of changing complexity of running a business, and then making sure that we are aligning our teams to move at that pace to meet that changing complexity. And so with that comes things like change management and the business case of using AI, right? And all of the issues with employee engagement that come up. But I categorize that all under just the pace of change and the complexity.
Yeah, there's all kinds of rabbit holes we could go down there, full conversations. What has you excited about what you're seeing in credit unions?
The pace of change and the complexity. To me, that's exciting. And I've actually been spending some time on this. I kind of operate, because this is my anniversary with Humanidei, July tends to be a month that I spend a lot of time in planning and reflection and consideration for it, both about kind of how I'm running the business, but also what the business is focused on. And I see that pace of change as creating a tremendous opportunity. And personally, I actually like moving at that pace. Like, I like a full life. I like this ability to consider and to move fast and to be ready. And so it's exciting to think about what those credit unions who are willing to move fast can get done in this world.
Absolutely. Okay. So I'm going to pivot a little bit, but I think it may tie into the pace of change and everything else that goes along with it. And that's to this conversation that we were having earlier in the week around friction. And needless to say, we had many opportunities to talk about that. And we kept talking about how this could relate to the credit union movement. And so I want to give a little bit of background here for our listeners. I'd consider us both travelers, both business and, for work and personal, for the experience of seeing the world. I think I'm at 72 countries now on the app that we use to track these things. Do you know what's your number? My
number is 48. Our DEI practitioner network played 2 truths and a lie, and I had to come up with the number of countries I visited as mine.
So you knew what it was. Yeah. And we'll hit a few more this summer. That'll put you over 50. And Delta loves us. We're both million milers. So needless to say, we've been on a few flights. We've stayed at a few hotels. Recently, we had an experience that we normally don't do, which is using a travel agent and staying at an all-inclusive resort. And this was because we were attending a good friend of ours' destination wedding. And that's where this conversation about friction came in. Over and over, we kept making comparisons of that experience we were having to what credit unions and other businesses may be doing that they thought maybe was in making things easier. And we thought it'd be a fun conversation. So when you think of the conversation and what we've been talking about over the past week, what comes to mind, I guess, first on how that relates to credit unions?
The first place, so obviously I work primarily in the workplace side of it. So primary focus that I have is in employee experience and employee engagement with the workplace. So as we were moving through this process, I was recognizing these points of friction where it felt harder than what it could have been. And it reminded me of a conversation. Last year, I had the chance to speak at Samantha Beeler's League of Southeastern Credit Union Vision Conference. And I talked about employee engagement. At the end of my session, an executive came up to me from a really large, sophisticated organization and said, one element we need to look at more is what the employee experience feels like. Because what we're seeing is a really high level of turnover in our younger employees who come in and start using our systems and say, these are bulky and cumbersome and they don't work, and I'm not going to deal with it. And so they leave because we're adding too much friction to that employee experience. But then it goes into, what do we think we're doing? So in this case, this work with the travel agent was imposed upon us. We had to do it if we wanted to be part of the group, and made it more complex for us. We knew we had expertise where we could have taken shortcuts on things, but somebody else said, this is the right thing to do for the system and process for the larger group that we have here. And it made me curious how often we do that with employees, where we sort of impose something on them and say, well, we know best and this is the right way. But maybe the right way is outdated, or maybe the right way is designed by people who know one thing, but not this thing really well.
It's interesting, as you said that, as you were talking about that, and you talked about, say, younger staff coming in and feeling like some of the systems are antiquated or just there's too many friction points. Because one of the things that I know in our conversation that kept coming back up and kept popping into my mind is we often hear from friends, family members, whoever it happens to be, that, oh, but travel's stressful. That's an issue. And we kept thinking, so the person who is a little bit scared or stressed of travel gets a travel agent that actually makes it more difficult and more stressful to go through this process. It adds more steps. It almost is self-fulfilling, where it is like, holy smokes, that was a stressful experience. I think of us just getting off the airplane and a ride was arranged, which sounds nice. We could have been there an hour earlier if we just took the Uber like we normally would have, because that arranged ride was, we had to give all the information a second time and had to find, so when you think about that, what can we do, I guess, to make sure that we don't think we know best, I guess, and we're taking some of that experience from people who do have maybe an expertise to make that experience better, or at least meet the experience. Because that's the thing. I think when I look back on the past week, if it was just a normal experience for us, we would have not thought twice about the travel agent being there. And maybe that's how it probably should have been, at least in our opinion.
Right. And so that raises some interesting questions, because, the purpose of getting the travel agent was to create a consistent experience for the varying levels of travelers that were in this group that we were in. There were 30 of us or something that were there. And we look at processes in our organizations in a similar way, where it's like we recognize that we have hundreds of employees and they're at different places of their knowledge and their expertise. So someone needs to create the experience that they can all share that will create some consistency, create some process. We can't have everybody just off willy-nilly doing whatever, right? But the problem that comes in it is when those systems and processes are designed by people who themselves have not experienced what it is. So in our case, our travel agent had never been to the resort, hadn't been through that experience herself. And what we often do in the organization is we set a process or system, and then we just leave it there. And new employees come in, and especially thinking about like the way people interact with like a core system to conduct transactions or open new member accounts. So we set something 15 years ago, and that's the process we do. But our vendor has upgraded some systems, or something has changed, or the user interface has changed. And our frontline employees know that now they do these 3-step workarounds to actually get to what they want. And it should be shorter, but somehow that information doesn't go from the member service rep to the person who's setting those processes and procedures, who's somewhere else in the organization, both, physically and probably vertically in the org chart. And so what we have is a situation where the user themselves are not able to appropriately give feedback on why it didn't work. Or if they do, that feedback is dismissed. Well, that was a one-off. Well, you're doing it the wrong way. Well, I guess you must have missed that third time you were supposed to enter your information and confirm it before we went. And that's why you had more difficulty than someone else did, for example.
So this wasn't just a travel agent experience. It was also because we were part of a group. We were supposed to be unique, I think was the word that they used. And we had our own special check-in area. And, there were so many friction points that were even put in there where it was after waiting 3 hours to actually check in and get our room, then they wouldn't just tell us where our room was. We had to be shown. And we're like, no, we can find the elevator and walk. Just tell us the room number, right? Like that got me thinking. There were points of that where it had me thinking about like that idea of like showing up where people are. The experience that, say, a member wants to have, it can be different at different points in time. Sometimes we just want the smooth experience, like self-service. Other times we want help. We need help. But if you're, in a weird way, if you're almost forcing the service on somebody who's not asking for it, that seems like it could create a friction point where it's like, oh, we want that interaction one-on-one, face-to-face type thing. And if the person's like, I just want to do it on the app. That's why you have the digital banking. Why do I have to now come in? Can you talk about it from that side of things as well when we're looking at, I guess, the system as a whole? Because you talked about the pace of change earlier. The pace of change, there's things that we do in our daily life that are really service touch points that we don't even think about because they seem so seamless. And how do we make sure that as credit unions, we're keeping up with that pace of change and that expectation as well?
There's a lot of customization that consumers expect today. We've been taught that that's possible. With Amazon, however many years ago, started giving us the, if you bought that, you probably want this. And a lot of times they're right. Yeah. And so,
or we might be out of coffee and need to reorder, right?
Right. So, sometimes, like, here's an example. So, we buy paper towels and so when you buy paper towels, Amazon asks you if you want to subscribe and save, and they actually make it more difficult to just check out with a roll of paper towels or a unit of paper towels. But sometimes that almost kind of forces that subscribe and save on you, which is not always the best option for us because, if we're home in the winter, tons of paper towels get used. If we're gone all summer, 0 paper towels get used. And so being cognizant of those abilities to customize. So offering something that's, hey, we think you might like it this way, but making sure the consumer has the opportunity to say, oh, there's something you don't know about my entire experience, and actually I need it this way instead. So what's really, when we have those, it's funny, I don't hear people say this anymore. I guess maybe we've just moved beyond it. But I remember about 10 years ago, everybody wanted to talk about the omni-channel experience. Right. So you can start something on your app, and then you can move it onto your desktop, and then you can go into the branch and finish it up if you need to. And maybe the reason we don't talk anymore about omni-channel is because it just became, it's everywhere now. Now that's what we do. But it's kind of like that omni experience. So I can choose whether I want to self-serve or work with a person. If I go to Whole Foods, I can choose the self-serve checkout, or I can choose to go through a checker. And I get to make that decision every time. So big produce day, definitely going to the checkout. Just a couple of things that I can quickly scan. Yep, I'll use self-service.
I can't even use the self-service if I forgot my readers because I can't read the little numbers. So.
But making sure we don't say, oh, well, last time you chose this, so that is always the track you're on, but really letting people customize it. And I think what that comes down to is humans want autonomy. Like, it's a major driver for us. We want the ability to make our own choice. So when something is imposed upon us, when we're told you have to move through a process this way, that automatically creates resistance from us, where I'll do it because I want to, not because you told me to, is something that I think we don't outgrow from childhood through life. And so
that's true. Let me ask you, a lot of leaders listen to the podcast, and I was thinking about this, that, at the resort we were at, the general manager doesn't necessarily know the process, like those pain points, and isn't seeing it every day because they weren't sitting at the front desk, right? How, as leaders of a credit union, you mentioned kind of the frontline staff and some of the turnover that maybe comes from friction points, but if you're not on the front line, you're not directly member facing every day, how do you make sure that the policies and procedures that have been put into place aren't creating these friction points? Like, how do you take that pulse regularly?
We have to make sure that we're listening to the people who are actually having that experience, both from a consumer side and from the employee side. So, but we have to be careful because a lot of times we'll say, oh, we'll just do a net promoter score, and that's going to tell us whether we're good or not. So would you recommend us to a friend? If you say yes, thumbs up all around. If you say no, thumbs down all around. Well, from an employee, Would you recommend that a friend work here? Sure, because there's great pay or there's nice people or I really love the mission. But if you ask an employee instead, is there anything about your job that creates pain points for you? And then they come back with information that you can actually take action on. And those pain points, they may say, it could be something like scheduling. It could be something like the actual use of the system. But we learn a lot when we ask those questions that are more open-ended. And sometimes those questions can't be done with a written survey. We love a written survey. We really love doing a written survey and then getting the results and saying, well, those people are just naysayers. And finding reasons to dismiss or excuse the feedback that we get. So sometimes focus groups are a better way. The CEOs who go out and do listening tours, they actually spend times with small groups of employees and engage with them directly in their credit unions. You get a lot more meaningful feedback. And people are typically willing to give that feedback because if you're going to give me a way to make this better, I'm going to tell you how we can make it better.
I'll say a good thing about the resort. It made me laugh a little bit, but after our first, let's call it first day experience from a service level was not what we would have expected. And I went into the app and we were looking for a restaurant and one of those little survey things popped up. And I was like, oh, you shouldn't have asked right now. Because normally I'm a person who fills out reviews when things are great and I just kind of don't when they're not. But I was honest with my review on our initial experience. I gave some praise to some of the individual people that were doing a great job, but the overall experience, it was pretty brutal, 1 or 2 stars. But interestingly, we got a phone call from them. They came and stopped by the room the next day. And from that point forward, there was a person who knew us by name and room number and really tried to make sure that the experience was better. And that's where I give them credit. They actually, that survey was something they instantly went off of. It wasn't something that they, like you said, took back and went, that's just a cranky traveler or something like that. They instantly took action. And I thought that was great. Is there anything, you mentioned listening tours and things like that. What recommendations, I guess, would you give to credit union leaders to try to reduce those friction points either in our organization internally or externally?
I think that leaders should make sure that they actually try to go through the experience as a standard member. And that's tough to do. And I'll even say sometimes Oscar, I will talk about something and Oscar will point out to me, please recognize that that's a place of privilege. I'm not saying you shouldn't leverage that, but that's you putting your privilege at work. and so this is an example of us putting our privilege into work in a way that the average member wouldn't be able to. And so we were, this obviously, but for the listeners, we were going through a transaction that we wouldn't normally go through in the springtime. And it was something that I thought I should have been able to do through self-service, but it was an international wire. And because I've never done one before, I didn't realize that it took a different level of steps. And so I attempted to go through this and likely there was some element of user error happening as well.
Absolutely.
I didn't confirm everything the right way. I didn't XYZ.
We didn't know what we were doing.
But it was a more complicated process than I had typically had with that credit union. And it got to a point where it became too hard. And so my solution was, let's just email the CEO. And
who we both knew.
We did. So. And she solved the problem immediately, gave us a connection on her executive team who could help us out and carry us forward. And we got a highly personalized experience that made things much easier. And it brought back to the days of when I worked as a credit union executive at MAPS. I didn't go into branches to do transactions. I did it employees did it for me, but it was very different than walking through and doing it. It was more, kind of private client concierge level service. And if that's what I'm experiencing, I'm thinking, well, we've got the greatest service ever. Look at how high touch they are. Look at how anticipatory they are. But if you're
amazing, we are big fans of our credit union. So.
But if you just walk in off the street, is that experience the same? And again, typically people want to give us that feedback. So if you go look at your Google reviews and everybody in your Google reviews is saying, this is terrible, I have to call 4 times to get an issue resolved. And you're comparing it to, you just walk down and see Michelle in the contact center and it's fine. you're not having the same experience as your members. In the same way, you're probably not having the same experience as your employees. And so really fleshing that out, taking the opportunity to actually understand what it is, like sit in the chair, sit on both sides of the desk and experience what it's like to open an account. And you'll see those friction points there. And engage in conversations with your vendors, because our vendors themselves are sometimes a friction point too. And those vendors are usually a lot more responsive to the CEO than they are to the director of payments who's trying to move something forward too.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing with how, when you talk about the vendor side of things, there are so many tools today that we all use that we don't build internally. And so making sure that when we add the shiny new feature, it's not actually creating, like, it does align with everything else that we're doing, and it, enhances the experience, not makes it pretty, but a little more janky or something like that. So before we move on to the rapid fire questions, we're still going to have those, even though you've been on the show a bunch. I had to make some new ones, as always, but just a little bit of free space for your own brilliance here. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about today or that you'd like to share with our listeners?
As we kind of mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, it's exciting that, 5 years into Humanidei. So I've been spending a lot of time in reflection and thinking about how we're doing and how we've grown. And it's just really exciting to be looking at credit unions' attitudes toward their team members today and the investment in development and leadership development. And frankly, some of that is being imposed by the NCUA. I think I took calls from 4 current or prospective clients in the last couple of weeks because the NCUA just gave exit reviews that said you need a more formal succession plan than what you have. But these people are calling and saying, I wish it hadn't come up in the exam, but they're not wrong. We do need this more intentional, and we don't want just a document we can show them. We really want to invest in the talent and our people. And 5 years ago, when I decided to move forward with Humanidei, when I had the chance to partner with the now retired Diana Dykstra and get it off the ground, what I was deeply passionate about was this idea that when credit unions get the people side right, we can fulfill our mission. We will be able to eradicate global poverty if we have the right players in the right places in our organizations. And seeing that amplified emphasis on that. It's more today than it was 5 years ago. And it's more 5 years ago than it was when I started 25 years ago in the industry. And so 23. I'm excited about that. And I'm excited about the pace that we get to keep exploring this and looking at this and moving that forward.
That's awesome. And congratulations. It's been fun to have a front row seat watching you grow this amazing company and the work you're doing in credit unions. So congratulations, my love. Well done. One thing I'd want to add, and it's been an interesting thing here at CUInsight this past few months too, because we're kind of maybe news to everybody will see it in the not too distant future, but we're kind of tearing everything down to rebuild a new CUInsight. It's been so much fun when you mention pace of change to be able to look at every experience and like every experience the user has when they come to CUInsight. How can we reduce friction both inside and what people don't see on the back end side of it? And so that's all been exciting too. I mean, I think for all credit unions out there and quite honestly vendors in the space and everybody is like to be able to do what you mentioned you're doing, not only just because it's 5 years in, but what you tend to do in July when you're kind of at that yearly anniversary is to look at the overall experience, of Humanidei and what that means. And do you have any, I mean, as somebody who is, I know you as being fairly reflective, but you're also a planner and love to have a plan of what to do. If you could give a tip, this one wasn't on the list of questions I have, but after I was listening to you, if you have a tip for other leaders out there, the CEOs of organizations, on how to not only embrace the change, but maybe even look forward to it and to give yourself the space to actually do that and not just put out the fire that's happening today, but to reflect and also look forward.
Yeah. So I will just kind of quickly say, sometimes the biggest challenge we have as leaders is not that we need to be excited about the change, because oftentimes we really are and we're leading that, but it's making sure we don't just do, but we are planful about it so that we can bring our teams along with us in this change, because we get super excited. Like, we're ready. We're raring to go. And this is actually part of the reflection that I've been doing lately, because I think there's a lot of sentiment out there, and maybe it's just, my Instagram algorithm that's like really encouraging, like, oh, slow things down and don't hustle so much. And I've had to accept, like, I'm good with being a hustler. Like, I like my pace of it, and I understand why there are other people who need to move through things in a more meticulous, more thoughtful way. And so what I have to do is essentially I kind of like to call it a slowdown, but like a forced period of thinking space for me. So I significantly reduce, I've tried to do this for the last couple of years, significantly reduce the number of Zooms I have during the month of July. And the reason for that is, if I'm not careful, my entire calendar is Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. And that doesn't give time to put down step by step, articulate the why behind what we're doing. It doesn't mean my brain turns off. I keep doing things. But what my team gets is, hey, we should XYZ. And then I'm on the next Zoom call and they can't be like, why, how, with whom, that should come into all of that. Which one of us were you talking to in that time period? So what ends up happening by giving myself that space? And of course we have planning sessions, and of course we have team meetings, but giving myself that space to really prioritize, really anticipate the future, look toward the change that's coming, look toward what really worked for us, and maybe even doing kind of a start, stop, continue exercise. So what did we do last year that we did because we've always done it, and not because it's moving us toward the future? Like, let's stop doing that. Like, what should we continue doing because it's perfectly aligned with who we are and what we're trying to move to? And what should we start doing that we haven't thought of yet that is going to be necessary 3 years or 5 years from now? So taking the time to actually first figure that out, and second, take what happens up here in my head and put it into a place that can be communicated, that my team can ask questions about, that we can engage around, that then becomes a more tactical plan to move that forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good stuff there. All right. So we're going to move on to the rapid fire questions, because it wouldn't be the show without them. What is something that you think about right now that gets you excited today?
Well, today I'm really excited because, we're recording this at the beginning of July. So we're getting ready to move into that time period where life looks a little different. And part of that this year does involve some pretty extensive travel. So we are excited that in this month, we're going to take some personal time as well and be able to give an experience to our niece and nephew that they haven't had before. And I'm extremely excited. We're taking them on their first real international trip, their first visit to Europe. And I'm extremely excited to see how they look at a world that's different than what they've seen before. I remember the first time I went to Paris. I was 21. It was my first trip abroad. I had to get a passport to do it. I went over to do a study abroad. And I remember thinking, wow, I went to DC in the 8th grade. I grew up in Oregon, for those who don't know. I went to DC in 8th grade and thought everything was so old and historic. And then I went to Europe and it was like, oops, that's different. So I'm excited to see them have these experiences the first time. I'm excited to see, we'll be in Athens. So talk about historic, right? And like just a whole different eye-opening opportunity. So that's what I'm extremely excited about. And I'll stop talking about it or else I'll go on forever.
No, we are excited. But you mean everybody doesn't record podcasts on a Saturday morning at 8:30 before we get on an international flight? What is something that's taking up that Jill self-growth space currently? What are you working on?
So much. I think part of the reason why I'm talking about this, embracing the fast pace and kind of accepting it, is really what I'm working on right now is being comfortable with the fact that I like a full life. So all my life, I've had people say, especially since starting my professional career, I've had people say, oh, be careful or you're going to burn out. And it doesn't resonate with me. I bristle greatly. And I'm sure over the years you've heard me complain about it or vent about it. I don't respond well to people saying, gosh, that pace though, you just won't be able to keep it up and you're going to burn out, because I think I'm capable of self-management. So I've been really reflecting on this. Another significant thing for me about the month of July is that it's the month my mom passed away. And so we're moving up to the 16th anniversary of that. And she didn't have an easy life. She dealt with a lot. And so growing up, I watched a lot of challenges in my household with mental health. And I know that I got really scared about not being able to be happy. So I spent a lot of my life trying to make sure that I could be resilient. And so I anticipate, well, if this goes wrong, am I still going to be okay a lot? And so I've wondered sometimes, based on that feedback I get, if I move really fast because I'm trying to avoid something. And I've been spending this time in reflection thinking, like, no, that's just who I am. And I can let myself be that and enjoy that and not be afraid that it's because it's a coping mechanism. And I can be confident about that because I do things like have a July where I am saying, oh, I've been on too many Zooms this year. It's time to take a little break and be a little more thoughtful on that.
That's true. Window or aisle seat?
It depends on who I'm next to. So, and how long the flight is. If it's longer than a 2-hour flight and I'm sitting by strangers, I want the aisles so I don't inconvenience them if I have to get up and go to the restroom. If it's an overnight flight, I actually will take the window because I'll curl up and fall asleep. I can sleep anywhere and I won't get up and use the restroom. If it's with you and Crosby, I always get stuck in the middle somehow. So I don't know. But I like my travel companions the best then. So maybe the center seat's my preference.
We're bigger. What's the best sandwich?
Oh, that depends. You can't choose just one.
It's the Cuban.
I like a cold sandwich, I think. I like it, and I like it to have alfalfa sprouts in it. So,
what number am I thinking of right now?
7.
No,
14.
14. All right. So you always have a good book recommendation. Anything you're currently reading, or is there a book that you've recently read that you think everybody should take a look at?
So I'm going to have to be more visionary with this one. So haven't read it. am getting ready to. Oh. With our executive coaching practice, Tracy has recommended that clients look at this book called Own Your Greatness. And we've given it out. We've gifted it to individuals because something that we hear over and over again in the DEI work and the organizational consulting and the leadership development in our executive recruiting is that people feel like they have some imposter syndrome. They don't feel like they're good enough for whatever they've already accomplished and whatever they set out to accomplish. And so this book, Own Your Greatness, Overcome Imposter Syndrome, Beat Self-Doubt, and Succeed in Life, is one that we're actually getting ready to use as a book club group with our Humanidei team. So I will be toting that around with me this summer and going through the workbook style of it and doing some reading with that. And what I've heard from the clients that Tracy has recommended it to is that it really gives some actionable, great strategies. So I'm pre-recommending it. I have not cracked the spine on this book yet, but it's coming up as something for us.
Well, we'll be interested to hear your review when you're done. And there you go. That's it. Thank you so much for taking the time and doing this today, my love. I always appreciate you being on the show before we jump on a plane and take off for summer adventures. If people have additional questions of you, what's the best way to find you? What's your poison? LinkedIn, email? How should they get a hold of you?
Email will be the best way right now.
Email. All right. Well, we will link to that as well as your LinkedIn so they can follow along all your great thought leadership as well. And we'll link to everything else we talked about in the show notes. Thank you again for being here today.
Thank you. It was great to have this little visit before we launched that adventure.
A few things before we go. Please make sure to check out our sponsor, Velera, in the show notes. Velera is the nation's premier payments credit union service organization and financial technology solutions provider. They're also a longtime supporter of the show and allowing me to have this much fun doing what I do. So please stop by and check them out.
Please also subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. Apple, Spotify, you pick it. And if you're looking for a book mention, like the one Jill mentioned today on the show, a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next read is on its way from Amazon, or like I tend to do most of the time now, download it on Audible. Last but certainly not least, I want to thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock, and I appreciate each and every one of you. Be well, friends, and hope you're having an amazing summer.